Okay, hopefully everyone's in now. Sorry, we can't see or anything like that. Thank you so much so far for everyone joining us. I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes before we get going, just for any late people wanting to join. And those that are on at the moment, if you have any questions that you want to ask Ben or myself throughout the session, there is a chat function. You need to put your questions into the chat function and I will ask them to Ben as we go. We'll give it a couple more minutes. Started recording, so that's a win for me. Just awkwardly, you and I sitting here now. Sorry, everybody. Did you want to share your screen, Ben, and get it up so it's ready to go? So hopefully everyone can see that. Can you flick me a message in the chat if you can't see it? Just so, oh, perfect. Thanks, Sophie. Just so I know that it's working. Okay, I don't want to muck around, so if Ben's ready, I think we'll get going.
Yep.
Cool. So thanks everyone again for joining tonight. Huge thank you to Ben and me pestering him to do this. I greatly appreciate it. As I said, if you have any questions throughout Ben's session, he would like you to just ask them as he goes. So just put them into that chat function and I will ask Ben as he goes and get them out there, or any other questions that you guys might have. Otherwise, I'll hand it over to Ben and yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Amelia and Holstein Friesian for putting this on for us this evening. So I'm Ben, I'm the Regional Sales Manager for Vitaly New Zealand. So I look after basically the whole country, the tech teams that run around and anything else that kind of covers off in the day-to-day business. I've got a reasonably strong background in it all, but I'd definitely say now that I am not the doctor or the scientist. So if there's any really technical questions, I will take them away and get answers from our team in America, who are a lot smarter than me when it comes to embryos, and we'll bring the answers back to you. So hopefully it's all going to work. So who is Vitaly? For those of you that have seen this presentation before, I do apologise. We have done it a couple of times around the country at various different things, but basically we're a global precision livestock company aiming at reshaping the way cattle producers perform worldwide. So in order to do that, it's basically fast-tracking genetics through embryo programs. So getting that genetic gain going as quick as we can globally. So there we go. There's all sorts of fancy things. For Vitaly, we kind of see this as a triple threat, right? So there's a global demand for protein, there's a demand for a more sustainable environment, and there's producer economics behind that. So still being a profitable business when it comes to running. The challenges we see with that globally within the cattle producers market is kind of, again, from three different angles. So we've got a real labour challenge, both domestically here and globally around the world. We've got really limited data, or we've had limited data and limited access to really future technologies, so like the embryo work, the IVF embryo work, and how far that's come in the last 15 years. And then if you look at the amount of genotyping, phenotyping data that's available both domestically and globally, helping speed that up so we've got more options as primary producers. And then trying to get some more stable results. You'll see a little bit later on in the presentation, I've got a slide around some of the New Zealand results we've had so far. And it'll show that there still is some variation in those results and the predictability of them, but the stronger we can get that, the quicker we can progress for everyone. Just bring all of these up. So Vitelli's business is threefold. So a lot of you are probably aware of what we call the advanced business. So that is the IVF embryo part of the business. We also have our Vitelli Sense business, formerly known as GrowSafe for those that have been involved in the beef industry before, but it's basically a net feed intake tool to measure feed efficient beef cattle. So obviously the more feed efficient those beef cattle are at feed to gain, then the more profitable your business is going to be. And then we've got our insights tool. So that's around data analysis and supporting tools that we use predominantly in the beef cattle side of things, but is available for dairy as well. And Amelia, slow me down if I'm talking too fast. So Vitelli globally, we're in 23 different countries at present. Testing sites, we're up over 180 now. So testing sites are the pretty pictures of cows. So those are the feed efficiency units that we have around the world. And that capacity now is at just over 220,000 animals. And then 18 global IVF labs. So opening New Zealand full-time last year. And we opened our Brisbane lab, which would have been one of the most recent in September last year as well. So our New Zealand presence so far, so we came into the market back in September 2022 as a bit of a trial run for some breeding companies to basically trial the technology, see how we perform against what was available in the domestic market. And then from that, decided to open full time in 2023, May 2023. So with that, we're starting to build some ecosystems around the country as far as donor centres and satellite facilities to give farmers the most possible access to that technology that we can to help them, to help you guys have it available at your fingertips. To kind of talk more about that ecosystem and I guess to how Vitelli works globally, which is probably slightly different to what some of you are used to in the local market, is basically we know we make embryos really well. So in parts 3 and 4 in that diagram, from the oocyte collection to making the embryos and freezing them down, that is our real area of expertise. That's where we excel in. That's where we know we do well. And they basically, the Vitelli model globally is then to partner with those people around the globe that can do the other parts of that equation well. So that's donor management, donor housing, semen collection, and then for us here in New Zealand, recipient management, so going back onto farm. And we actually do look after embryo transfer in New Zealand, which is kind of outside the normal for Vitelli as a global company. So if you went to somewhere like the States or Australia, for example, most vet clinics have their own embryo transfer technicians. And so those livestock producers use their local vets to then transfer all of their embryos for them. So that's where New Zealand's kind of slightly different in this model.
Sorry, Ben, just going back a little bit. Question for you from Sophie. What do you mean by satellite locations?
Perfect. And this slide kind of explains it. So satellite locations are facilities where they collect the donors for us. So they'll house the donors, talk to all of the farmers, bring them in, and then we'll come in, take the oocytes out and take them back to the lab and fertilise them. So in the New Zealand example, we've got XL Breeding in the South Island. So they're a satellite facility for us, which is basically they source and find all the donors and we come in and make the embryos for them.
Okay, I've got another question for you. which
Yep.
you might have been going to get to, but I'll ask it now anyway before I forget. Reset management is a real concern. MOA versus IVF, our hold rates on IVF are horrendous. What can be done to improve this?
Yeah, yep, it's a real challenge for New Zealand because we put most of our embryos back into milking cows, which if you were to rank the recipients on a scale, milking cows would 9 times out of 10 be the worst recipients available to us as far as a conception rate animal. So we've got some work at the moment in a couple of our herds that are getting consistently good conception rates. So I'm talking conception rates in the 70s. Most of that's using some sort of collar, so cow manager or the Allflex collars. So some sort of technology to really help us identify the heats and the heat windows. And I've got some more on that later on. But yeah, trying to basically educate people and then find the right supporting people that have got available recipient animals. So whether that's dairy heifer cross or beef heifers, we've got a couple of farms that have come on board to support that network, but to try and get better conception rates from those embryos because it is a real challenge with the type of recipients that we're working with. Hopefully that helps answer your question, Hayden.
Cool, thanks, Ben.
So this map here, it's just a bit of a rough diagram to sort of show you where we are. So we are the green dot in Hamilton. That is our lab in Tristram Street. So we're right in the middle of Hamilton, which works quite well in terms of housing staff, keeping them happy, and then being local to most of the breeding companies that are sending us semen as well. Outside of that, we've got the 2 blue dots. So the one slightly lower down is in Te Awamutu at Wendy Harker's. So she houses donors for the Holstein Friesian Discovery Program for us. And then the other blue dot is out at Scotsman's Valley Road, just out of Hamilton. And that houses a lot of our other contract work for breeding companies, as well as some private work as well. The little orange dots are the feed efficiency units in New Zealand. So currently there's 3 installed on beef farms and at 1 beef finisher. So Risington and Hawke's Bay, Tamania and Kaikoura, and 5 Star Feedlot in Ashburton are our feed trial sites in New Zealand. So talking to just, I guess, to bring it back to completely New Zealand data and some of the results. So this is some of the work we did in the last 6 months of last year from July onwards, just to see what, or to give you an appreciation of what embryo production looks like for New Zealand and for the New Zealand dairy cow particularly. So breaking out our data away from beef cows because as you're probably aware, beef cows do tend to produce a lot better when it comes to producing embryos. So as you can see across the 2 parent breeds and the cross breeds, we averaged 3.2 embryos per collection. Now bear in mind most, I would say probably 80% of our dairy collection is all on 10 to 13 month old dairy heifers at that stage. There's very little cow data in this data. So globally, the average we would expect for Holsteins would be 4.5 embryos per donor per session. So that's on mature cows. And then typically on heifers, that pulls back by about 1. So New Zealand sits in line with what we're seeing globally as a trend. And then conception rate data-wise, so this is actually 2023's data, not 2022's. So that's my apologies, I'm not editing that slide. So from the data we got back, sitting around 55% for fresh and 44% for frozen. Now within that, there is a huge range. So for fresh, we're going from 10% up to 82% from memory, and from frozen from 0 to 100% conception rate. So that is still a very big range, which we would like to see pulled down. But it is good to work with averages. So typically what we would tend to see is about 10 to 15% less than your fixed time AI programs. as far as conception rate goes. So if you're good at getting cows and calf normally, you should be half by reasonable at getting recipients and calf at the same time. So why IVF? And I guess this kind of relates to the MOIT versus IVF argument that we do come across. And I would say it's not an and or, it's a complementary technology. So if you're doing a MOIT program and it is working, there's often not a reason to change that. Where IVF really comes into its own is we can get a lot higher production out of those animals in a short period of time. So IVF, we can be taking oocytes from those donors every 2 weeks, either while they're open or while they're in calf, up to about 120 days. So you've got a very big window, which means in a New Zealand context, you don't have to drop that cow out of a seasonal production system. She can remain in a seasonal production system and you can still get the embryos at the time you need them. So that's one of the real key differences between the two technologies. The other big one with IVF is we can start to produce from young females. So from about 7 months old, we can have these heifers in and producing embryos from them without any detrimental long-term effects to the reproduction life of that animal. So there's some real benefits there as far as pregnant animals and really young animals as to the embryos we can produce from those animals to keep them in the herd and keep them producing for the next season as well. So when it comes to Vitaly, and what we talk about a lot is the new era of IVF. So you would have seen in the past, and we still do see it overseas, is a lot of the IVF has a bad name because you used to have to stimulate cows and there used to be a lot of fetal calf serum used. And so in the new era IVF, there's a lot better technology there that is really helping us accelerate that growth with not having any detrimental effects to the animals. So if we look at, I can't speak for the other companies, but if we look at for Vitaly's difference in particular, so our media we developed in-house. So we have a couple of really smart cookies in America. Dr. Bruno Sanchez is the head of the company. He developed the media. And if we talk about the media in relation, so the media is what we grow the oocytes in, from harvesting from the cow through to freezing them down. And if we talk about the media that we use, so only 2 people in Vitaly know that recipe, and they're the only 2 that are able to make it. So they make it a couple of times a year, and the previous batch has to better the batch before it as far as efficacy goes for it to be used in our global labs. So those global labs, all of our 18 labs, all run on the same media at the same time. So anything troubleshooting wise all has the same effect. If we talk about what's in the media, so we don't use any FSH. So there's no FSH required, and we don't use any fetal calf serum, which is the what they believe is linked to the large calf syndrome that we see around the world. The next step from that media process is we're able to what we call as direct thaw embryos. So direct thaw, direct transfer, generally interchangeable terms, but it basically means that one embryo is stored per straw. So you defrost these straws the same as you would straw of semen. So it makes it nice, quick and easy. It makes it simple as far as it transferring those embryos for the technician, simple as far as buying and selling those embryos, because you're not needing to sell a cane of embryos, which is a sort of traditional vitrified process. So in the vitrification process, you generally freeze 5 to 6 embryos into one straw at once. So it requires a whole lot more setup and pack down to take those embryos out.
So just Ben, before you go on, so Sophie sent a message. She said their experience has been different with the young heifers repro performance after strenuous IVF programs. They've had 4 perfectly healthy heifers in a program of multiple IVF sessions, and they all failed to get in calf afterwards. So I guess it's just kind of what guarantee does a breeder have post your IVF treatment in relation to them being able to get in calf? I know cows have hundreds of eggs there, the same as every species, but you know, I guess it can affect it in a negative way as well. So is there any guarantees or anything that could cause it to not get in calf?
So there can be a number of different things there, and it's the same with mowat as far as what can happen internally with that heifer. So you're right in that the animal's born with all of the eggs it'll have for its lifetime performance. What you typically see when those heifers don't get in calf after some sort of embryo treatment is there's generally something else going on internally. So whether that's scarring in the ovaries or she's developed cysts, I recommend getting them checked by a vet to see what's going on there first, because there is basically a wide range of stuff that could be happening there. The procedure itself, not having hormones, does have basically that's the better effect of the animal, is you don't upset a hormone imbalance in a very young animal, whereas you can do that by mowat if you're not careful. So that's the kind of the key differences that I was trying to get. But definitely consult your vet, see what's going on inside that heifer, because it could be something as simple as cysts that's stopping her ovulating properly, and that's a really quick treatment with a shot of GnRH, and she'll come back into production and cycle again.
Great, thanks, Ben.
So going back to the slide on the screen, so this is kind of the Vitale step, and you'll see the second step there that says donor prep, that's grayed out. That's the big difference or the big change within the industry in the last couple of years that started to accelerate that. So in the States, you still see a little bit of it, and that's what they call donor prep. So they'll use a shot of FSH to what they believe is bring that heifer into cycling. What it actually only does is it increases the size of the follicle on the ovaries. So if you picture the ovary as a tennis ball, on that tennis ball on the outside is a whole lot of follicles, and in those follicles is the eggs. Now, you used to stimulate donors so that that follicle was bigger, so the technician can see it easier on the ultrasound to be able to harvest those oocytes out. The ultrasound technology has got drastically better, and it's still continuing to improve to a point now where we don't need to do that step in the process to be able to get the same results as far as oocyte harvest goes. So it makes it really quick and simple as far as you can pull your donor out of the paddock that morning that we show up, run her through the crush. The process takes about 15 minutes and she's on her way again. So as you follow through that program, so we have the oocyte pickup. That's technically what we would call day -1 in a 7-day program. So we come on farm or into centre, we pick up the oocytes, they then all go back to the lab, and then the following morning they're then fertilised to start the process to mature into an embryo and then freeze down. So hopefully the next slide, yeah, there we go. So this is what it looks like from a physical, what you would see at a farm level production wise. So I get a lot of farmers that ring me 2 or 3 days after the process and say, how many embryos have I got? If you can see there, the day we're on farm is actually day -1. So it does take 7 days, and then we freeze down over day 7 and day 8. So you get a full report of what was produced 9 days after we've been on farm, if that makes sense. But yeah, this is the key message I really wanted to drive home in terms of there's no FSH, so there's no stimulation, there's no build-up required to have that donor ready to bring her in for that embryo production, which is, yeah, it's a massive change in how things operate, and it makes things so much easier. a lot of people can remember their milk cows and just how many injections you need to give a cow in order to super ovulate her to go through that milk process. And I remember doing it myself many times, and the cows just get sick of it. Not only that, those injections need to be timed perfectly in order for it to work properly as it should. So there's a lot easier on the animals. It's all natural. There's a lot less stress. And so it's been really beneficial as far as a future development or forward development in the technology that's available to us. Hopefully this video will play. So there's no sound to this video, so don't worry if you can't hear anything, but this is effectively the gear that we use. So the technician on the left-hand side has got the probe and the needle. What he's holding in his hand is basically a simulated ovary. And then on the right-hand side, if you look at the ultrasound, what you're looking for is the little black dots. So you see he's just pierced one there. That's basically what they're doing, is going in, piercing the follicle, and then because it's all negative pressure under a vacuum, it then sucks that oocyte out down a tube and into a little vial that sits in a warmer on his chest. So the way our technicians work and the way that we teach them is that instead of moving the ultrasound in the needle, they actually manipulate the ovary. So the technician will find that ovary initially. He'll then map out in his mind with the ultrasound where the follicles are and how big they are. And then he'll start working from the smallest follicle to the largest follicle in a left to right fashion. And that's in order, if you ever come or you have this done on farm, we can show you, but those follicles will fill back up with blood. So if you've got a poor training technique or your technician doesn't know what he's doing, he can go in and try and harvest those follicles again, and that's when you get damage. So it's really important for that technician to be able to identify where those follicles are exactly, and then count through and work out where he's been, so he's not doubling up on anything, not causing any scarring. And that means that the cow leaves that crush really healthy and she'll be ready to go in 2 weeks. So that's kind of where the technology is at now, and that's the advancements that have come in. That means that the ultrasounds and the probes that we use now are able to pick up those really small follicles, and it means that we don't have to stimulate donors with FSH, and there's a lot better process. So to train to become one of these technicians, and the reason that we use South Americans is it's, as you could imagine, the same as AI, it's a real numbers game. So my technicians are all South American vets, and before they come and work for us, they would have done thousands of cows in both South America and America. So it would take, if you're a AI technician and you've done manual pregnancy palpating of cows, it'll roughly take you about 2,500 cows before you're at a speed where you can come and do this quickly and confidently. So it is a really long training period leading into these guys, and they are really good experts in their field. The language barrier sometimes doesn't help in New Zealand, but we do our best.
So, sorry, just a question. How small can a follicle be for you to collect it? Because you said you do it from the smallest to the largest. For it to be a viable follicle, how small?
They're tiny. They're millimeters in cross section. So I'll play that video.
Because they were
Difficult play.
Tiny on the screen. Like I've done ovary palpations and follicle like measurements and stuff for this when I worked for HFNZ, but our follicles had to be a certain size that we were aiming for to make sure that they were viable for the oocyte collection.
Yep.
So that's why how small.
Yep. So they can, as long as they can see it on the ultrasound and they can pierce it with the needle, then it can be collected. If I, sorry to jump around on the slides.
No, sorry.
But maybe I don't have the slide. So this step here, the day -1 oocyte maturation. So our in-house media that we use, we can actually mature those those oocytes that come out are very small follicles. So the oocyte's still ready to go. It's just not far enough along the maturation process as something that's right there and ready. But we can get really good success rates out of harvesting those young oocytes through that maturation process in our media.
Okay. Question from Daphne. Do you still recommend using FSH on older cows that don't often have as many oocytes?
No, because it doesn't work with our media. So we don't see a need for it. We don't have any issues with older cows. The oldest cow we did last year was 17, and she produced 10 embryos from memory. So we haven't seen any prevalence in New Zealand of issues with older cows. In fact, I'd say on average they seem to be producing better, which is quite contrary to what people think. And great question, because it is something I get asked frequently, is my donor too old? And the answer is no, she's not. As long as she's healthy, then it shouldn't be an issue. So these pictures here, so when we come out on farm or when you see us in a donor centre, there's a little, basically a mini lab set up on site. So when those oocytes come out of the cow, they're in a bit of fluid and blood. So we wash and clean them on farm, count them and grade them, and then they're packaged away, put in an incubator, and every step from here is completely temperature controlled at body temperature. So the room's heated, where the technician is working, we try and heat that as best as possible. So basically, as soon as those oocytes come out of the cow, it's as temperature controlled as we can get it in all the environments. And then obviously once we're in the lab, it's the room in there is fairly hot and it doesn't change. It's a nice controlled environment at the lab. So this is just having a bit of a look at some embryos and some embryo development. And I wanted to talk a little bit about our media here, because often I get asked a lot of questions around grades of embryos and whether we've got B and C grade embryos. And the truth of it is we don't often see them. So we have basically a slower maturing media that mimics the cow as close to possible. And in that, we tend to find that the embryos either develop into a really nice embryo or they don't. So we don't see a lot of B's and C's like you do in a MOA program. So when we come to freezing your embryos, we freeze down over about 2.5 days. So anything from day 6 to day 8 that matures to the early blastocyst and the blastocyst, so day 7/8, those are the embryos we're targeting to freeze. They're your most stable embryos, and that's why we freeze down over a longer process in our media process. So if you look at the embryos on the other screen, there is some photos. The dish in the middle, some really nice, healthy A-grade embryos. And the dish on the right, again, it looks like there's some unhealthy ones. This is just earlier in development. So this is looking at day, when did I take these photos? Day 2, day 3. So we've got some of them starting to form from morales to blastocysts, and we've got others that are still very early split cell development. So that's what you look at if you saw your embryos under a microscope, if you came into the lab. So for us in New Zealand, we freeze a lot of our embryos, and the reason we do that is logistically it's very challenging, but the reason we're able to do that is we can really maximize the amount of recipients we use. We know that our direct transfer method, we're having really good pregnancy rates. Obviously there's some variation that we see around the country in that, but we're able to basically utilize as many donors as we can and then push that production as much as we can in a seasonal system. Obviously, we don't have the luxury in New Zealand like they do in America, where you've got cows that are available all year round for recipients and flushing. So freezing them works really well in New Zealand, and that's part of the reason why we've come into the market to help support it here as well. Now, here's the golden egg. If we could crack this side of the business globally for any embryos, whether it's MOAT, IVF, the recipient is such a big part of the puzzle. And unfortunately, time and time again, it's part of the puzzle that I see get neglected. So for us, this is what we like to see as far as the ideal recipient cow selection. Now, bear in mind, most of what you'll see with Vitelli is it's American-based research because we've only been in New Zealand operationally for just coming up a year. So we're still gathering a lot of New Zealand-specific data. But basically, you're looking for cows that are in the middle of your herd, so 3 to 7 year olds. I tell farmers you want cows that are your good, solid performers. So don't think your cow bottom 20%. Think your 30 to 60% cows in your herd. Your ones that are solid performers, they're not your top cows, but they do a good job. They've been calved for sort of, I would say, at least 40 to 60 days. Ideally, if they've had a cycle as best case scenario as well. So they've cycled once, and then you synchronise her to bring her in as a recipient. If I look at the data for New Zealand and some of the pregnancy rates, the time and time again, the best pregnancy rates we see is either in heifers or dairy beef crosses. Unfortunately, it's not something that we have a heap available to us, but it is something that tends to hold an embryo really well if you are struggling in that path. Pay super careful attention to your synchronization protocols. So we recommend a full CEDA program, so a 7-day CEDA program, and then picking cows out of quite a specific heat window in that CEDA program. So if you've got enough recipients and they're available to pick from them, then often you can take that window from a 48-hour window down to a 36 or even a 24-hour window, and picking those really gold recipients in the middle is what you're after. Because at the end of the day, we've spent all the money leading up to this to fall at the final hurdle as far as recipients go is something that really, really does bother me. And then management of those recipients post the embryos going in. So making sure that they've got a really good rising plane of nutrition. There's nothing basically holding them back, so you're not going to get any late embryonic loss, or you can reduce the amount of late embryonic loss. So key take homes. IVF is used to be a last resort option. Today, it's basically the first and best tool to accelerate, and that's really changed globally. We can see that MOAT globally on the International Embryo Transfer Program. MOAT globally is decreasing, whereas IVF is taking off about tenfold. So the lines on the graph that are produced every year are really starting to separate now. Large-scale IVF will be driven by the use of frozen embryos, more specifically the direct transfer with more consistent results. So those consistent results are what we're really trying to achieve. We've got farms in America that'll hit 70% consistently year-round, regardless of the time. So it's about how do we replicate that, making sure that farmers are able to do that in their own environment. The culture media is the key success driver in IVF. So anyone can go and open an IVF lab tomorrow. Me and Amelia could go and purchase the gear. We could buy shelf media and start producing embryos next week. The setup and the cost of doing that is easy. Where the difference really comes is in the media that you grow them in. So ours is super specific to bovine. We only globally deal in bovine. We don't deal in any other animals. And that starts to show in the results production-wise we can get per donor as far as embryos go. And that last part is, again, that we don't want to own every part of the business. We know we're really good at making embryos. We want some other skilled people to complement us in their current businesses to help drive that whole market forward and make it more accessible to everyone. So it is starting to grow in New Zealand, and we would like to help facilitate that growth further. And that's my presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Just any other questions, just fire them through. My question for you is frozen embryos. How long do you recommend people, well, like how quickly do you recommend people using those frozen embryos? Like my family, we had some that sat in the bank for 22 years and hey, 4 of them still held. So, you know, but I'm sure you wouldn't recommend leaving them that long.
Yeah, I mean, physical ability for the embryo to last that long is fine, provided it's stored correctly in suspended animation and liquid nitrogen. They can survive. From a genetic standpoint, embryo-wise, unless it's a specific family line that you're really chasing, genetics and genotyping is moving so quickly now that my gut feel, if you haven't used those embryos in sort of 1 to 2 years, then the genes are starting, or the genetic lag starts to build very quickly. So if you look at some of our genetic programs we do both domestically and overseas, we're using 7 to 10 month old heifers, and then those heifer calves are born, and then we're making embryos from them. So you're speeding up that generation lag for the industry. So if you've got embryos sitting in the bank for 20 years, chances are the genetics on those embryos mightn't be very good anymore.
Well, they weren't going to stand up on the BW system, we knew that, but it was a very good family line. Question from Daphne.
It's something we probably see more in the beef too. We see a lot of old embryos in the beef, and it's all about family lines and beef. So it's kind of horses for courses what you're after, but it's
It was from our original Holstein cow, so yeah, that was why they sat there. So Daphne asks, on the website it talks about reverse sorting semen. Can it actually be done here in New Zealand?
Yep. I've been making these inquiries for you, Daphne, and I was going to give you a ring tomorrow. So the Sexing Technologies, or ST Genetics, controls the rights and the use of the sexing machine. Currently, there's only one in New Zealand. It's located at LIC, and you have to book in quite far in advance to get that machine. So as a technology, it's not actually available freely to us in New Zealand at all at the moment. It is something we do in America, but those sexing machines are based in our labs in America. So there's less IP patent rights around them, company politics, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, in New Zealand at this point, we don't have access to it.
I know there's a lot of people that would agree that it would be nice if other people had access, but yes, as you said, politics. So the calves born that are used with your media, have they had any issues with deformations or issues with the calves when they are born?
So you still get a prevalence of it, same as you would in any embryo reproduction system. What we're not seeing is the big prevalence of large calves that we've seen in the past in New Zealand. Whenever you make embryos, you're obviously harvesting. You have to think about this from a genetic standpoint, is you're harvesting all of those oocytes and they're being fertilized with semen directly. So you're always going to get cells that come into contact that in nature would have never come into contact. And that's probably the easiest way to describe it, that there can be a slight higher prevalence of abnormalities because you've got things that have met each other that never would have met each other in a natural environment because we are manipulating it.
Cool. Your slides must have been so informative that no one else is really asking any questions. So that's a great sign, right?
Got to be a good sign. Either that or they've all gone to sleep.
Well, I hope not. If no one else has got any more questions, then we might leave it there. Thanks again, Ben, for giving up your time this evening. I found it extremely informative. I hope everyone that joined us, all 31 of you, which was awesome, have found something interesting out of that. I have recorded this session. It will be available on the Holstein Friesian website if you know someone that is interested in learning about it that missed it tonight, or if you want to go back and just go over anything that Ben covered today, you're more than welcome to. Otherwise, thank you all. And we'll hopefully see you all at our next webinar in a couple of months' time. So thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Now I've got to figure out how to